So we talked recently about the Bark Speeder, which was the primary reconnaissance speeder utilized by the Galactic Republic during the Clone Wars, but I figured today we would take a look at some of the other recon vehicles that were utilized by the Republic, most notably the All Terrain Reconnaissance Transport, or ATRT. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the All-Terrain Reconnaissance Transport, commonly known as the ATRT or the Republic Scout Walker, was one of the primary scout vehicles utilized by the Galactic Republic during the Clone Wars. This two-legged walker was seen from basically the very early days of the war all the way up to the end of the conflict and beyond, and served as a predecessor to later Imperial walkers. But that's a story that we'll get into a little later in the video. Let's start with its design and manufacturing. The ATRT was designed and manufactured by Kuat Drive Yards, which made a lot of the heavy walkers for the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Empire. At 3 meters long and 3.5 meters tall, it was pretty small for a walker, but pretty big for a scout vehicle. And with a speed of 75 kilometers an hour, it was slower than a lot of speeder-based sort of reconnaissance vehicles, but faster than a lot of walkers, which put it in this weird middle ground. But it filled that role nicely thanks to its armament. The primary armament for an ATRT was a single chin-mounted MAD 38 laser cannon, but it was supplemented by a mortar launcher mounted on the back of the vehicle. Now, it's worth noting that that laser cannon would later be swapped out for a lot of different types of weapons, but we'll get to that later on when we talk about its history. But on top of its weapons, it had a very complicated sensor suite, which allowed it to get a pretty good picture of the terrain in front of it, including locations for a lot of enemy forces, which were useful in its role as a scout vehicle. It had only a single pilot, and unlike a lot of other scout vehicles, wasn't even really capable of carrying any passengers, meaning that if you had multiple people, you needed multiple walkers. There was no additional sidecars or back seats that you could put a passenger in. It was just the pilot, and that's it. So let's talk about its history. It was first deployed in the very early days of the Clone Wars, having first been seen at the Battle of Christophsis, utilized by the Galactic Republic. It would become a mainstay vehicle throughout the conflict, filling both scout roles and fast attack roles. While it was primarily built to scout ahead of advancing Republic forces with a shorter range than a Bark Speeder, but higher firepower, it would ultimately end up filling a lot of different roles. For example, it was used very frequently for fast attack. We see during the Battle of Ryloth, a group of ATRTs are used to destroy a bunch of armored assault tanks that were pinning down a column of Republic heavy tanks. We also similarly see ATRTs used as the first light armor deployed to Umbara during the Republic invasion of that world. All of this, by the way, was made possible by one of the interesting features of the ATRT, its compact size, which allowed it to be stored in a variety of other vehicles and basically hot deployed into combat situations. 2 ATRTs could be stored in the back of an ATTE, allowing them to be deployed quickly if the Republic heavy vehicles end up in a tricky situation. And a single ATRT could be deployed from the back of a low-flying LAAT gunship, allowing them to be hot deployed into combat without ever even landing the dropship. They were utilized all the way up to the end of the conflict, where they were seen during the Battle of Kashyyyk, which was raging up until the very end of the war. And with the rise of the Empire, they didn't immediately disappear. They remained in service for the Galactic Empire into the first few years of the Empire's reign, but like a lot of other Republic military equipment, they were phased out in favor for newer vehicles. This one in particular would be replaced with the AT-DP and the AT-ST. And within a few years of the end of the Clone Wars, they were primarily phased out by the Galactic Empire, but their history in military conflict wasn't done yet, because a lot of these phased out ATRT walkers ended up in the hands of the Rebel Alliance. Rebel cells really favored these walkers, particularly Rebel cells that operated in planets with large open spaces like Tatooine. Terrain like that allowed these walkers to really shine thanks to their fast speed and relatively good maneuverability. These Rebel cells would often replace the chin-mounted MAD 38 laser cannon with a different weapon system. For example, a smaller repeating blaster, which allowed them to lay down a more thorough field of fire, or a flamethrower, which allowed them to lay down a literal field of fire. We would see these used basically all the way up to the end of the Galactic Civil War, with them popping up here and there with smaller Rebel cells, and later on some fringe New Republic units. However, at the end of the Galactic Civil War, the New Republic began demilitarizing, and a lot of these walkers were basically the first things to hit the chopping block, since they were some of the oldest equipment utilized by the New Republic. However, it's worth noting that while the ATRT did ultimately fill a variety of different roles depending on which faction was using it and the military requirements at the time, it was originally built for a scouting role to be a fast reconnaissance scout for Republic forces, a role it shared with a lot of speeder craft, most notably the Bark Speeder, which served as the primary reconnaissance speeder of the Galactic Republic during the Clone Wars. And if you'd like to learn about the Bark Speeder, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments if you were the commander of a Republic unit trying to figure out which scout vehicle to deploy ahead of your forces. Would you rather deploy Bark Speeders, which are faster and can scout further out, but are less maneuverable and more lightly armed, or the AT-RTs, which have more armament but a shorter range? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.